change what the what the image grid looks like, or what workspace you're working on. It also helps you configure tables and graphs, and helps you set up image display and scaling. And so you can use this interface to expand different portions of that application interface and figure out where the different parts of MetaMorph are. So you could, for instance, go into MM and find the camera and see that's where you're going to be able to read or set the exposure time. So going now into some of the Python basics. First of all, we're using a variant of Python called IronPython. IronPython is based off of Microsoft.NET, and it gives you full access to the .NET programming language or programming group of languages. That means that you can create windows and dialogues, and you can interact with file systems all for free because you have IronPython. Python itself is a dynamically typed language, which means that you don't have to declare variables. You just type them in and use them. The variable can hold any kind of data, and you can have a string at one point and a number at another point. They call it duck typing, where a variable can be used in whatever fraction of the data that's stored in it. It doesn't really matter what's stored in it, as long as it can be used the way you want to use it. There are normal types of data, for instance, integers, which are whole numbers, floating point numbers, which they call floats, and then strings, which would have the str name. And you can convert from one type to another. Usually, if the conversion is required, there's methods with appropriate names. For instance, int with parentheses, that would be a method, and the value inside that parentheses would be the value that you want to convert to an int. And it doesn't matter what value is already stored or what type is already stored in the value. It would be converted from whatever it is into an integer. MetaMorph NX, most of the values that you'll find in NX are called properties. This mainly means that there's a group of methods associated with the value for manipulating the data. But the key points are that there's a value that you use to access or to set the property. So for instance, we looked at camera exposure time. But to actually read the exposure time, you use the mm.camera.exposure time.value. And to set the exposure time, you have that .exposure time.value equals a number. But there are a couple other ways of interacting once you play around and learn about properties. An important one is this property changed. This is a method that you can assign to property changed, which allows you to keep track. And you'll have this method called each time, for instance, the exposure time is changed, you can keep track of it. Or if you want to keep track of every time the illumination setting is changed, maybe you want to change some other hardware or log something. MetaMorph NX also exposes some properties that are collections. So instead of having a single value, we'll have multiple values. Properties in NX usually have a plural name. So instead of just illumination setting, which would be a property, you have illumination settings with an S at the end, and that would be a collection. We'll talk about lists in the next slide, but these collections can be accessed as if they were lists. Some properties will have a verb in the name, so mm.print. A verb is going to do something. Anything with a verb in the name is generally going to be a method, and the method is going to be executed to perform an action. Methods usually have parentheses, and then inside the parentheses you put one or more parameters. So for instance, this mm.print, if I put in hello world, that hello world is going to show up at the bottom of the scripting dialog in the output area. So here's a couple of the different data types, the advanced data types in Python. A list is a collection of objects. So here's just a collection of strings. The key with lists is that they're accessed via an index. You have these square brackets. You have data, and inside the square brackets you have the number 1. And so this is going to get you the value of data inside the bracket 1, inside index 1. This is how you would read data index 2. Values inside the list can have different data types. And there's a second data type that's very similar to lists. It's tuples. Tuples are created like lists, but instead of having square brackets, they have parentheses. The big difference between the two is that lists can be expanded. So if I now have a list of 3 values, I can add another string in there, and it would be a list of 4 values. A tuple is fixed. So once it has 3 values, once you assign it the first time, you can't add new values in, and you can't remove values from it. But otherwise, it's accessed the same way. A dictionary is a different type of collection that stores name and value pairs. And so if you have a complex data structure, you might want to use a dictionary so you can look up objects by name to get the value associated with them. They're created using these curly Q brackets. And you have a name, and then a colon, and then the value afterwards. Then separate key value pairs are produced with commas separating each key and value pair. If you look up a value in the dictionary by using the variable name and in square brackets, you put in a mapping key. And so if you wanted to add a new key value pair called position with the value of application scientist, you do data square bracket position is equal to application scientist, and if I wanted to pull a value out, it would be name is equal to data square bracket name. So that would be looking up this and returning the value Steve. Flow control. So also when you're working with scripts, you're going to want to choose a path to occur. If my measurement is less than 5, change my exposure time and retake those images, for instance. So you would do that with an if, elif, else structure. An if will conditionally execute code. It provides the keyword if. You provide some condition that translates to a true false value. If it's true, you're going to perform the actions that come next. Now, actions, if it's false, it's going to fall through to the next category. The next category could be an elif. This could be read as else if. So if condition is false, else if a second condition is true, perform this action. Else, if all conditions are false, do some other action. In this code, we're using blocks of data. A block allows you to perform more than one action as a single unit. So in this if condition, we have 2 steps that we want to perform if the condition is true. And so we need a block. The block is always started with a colon, then is indented a certain level. The indent actually defines the block level, And so the block comes to an end when you remove that indentation. You can line up to figure out what block you're in, because it would have to have the same indentation across the file. Conditions are what's called a Boolean value, a true or false value. There's two keywords, the keyword false and the keyword true, with capital letters for the first letter. Also, the number 0 counts as false, and anything else counts as true. And then if you have a collection, like a string or a list or a tuple or a dictionary, if those values are empty, there's no data in them, then they're also considered false. But if they have some data in them, they're considered true. So those are just ways to make conditional operations. Another type of flow control would be loops. A loop is going to execute a block of code a fixed number of times, a for loop. So for instance, given a list of names, John, Sam, Fred, we could use a for loop in the format for, the keyword for, the name. The name is a variable, and it's going to pull out the one individual value we're going to be using. In is a keyword, which means that it's a fixed word that has to be present. And then names would be the name of the collection. So it would be for each name in the collection of names, do whatever work you need to do with that name. So in this case, the body of the for loop has to be a block. You'd read it as for each name in the collection of names, do this. So for loop iterates over a collection, returning each value in a list or tuple, each key in a dictionary, or each number in a range value. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, you have a for loop that loops 100 times. It says for count in range 100. This range 100 actually produces a list of values from 0 to 100, or 0 to 99 actually. And so you're looking at each of the numbers between 0 and 99, and you'd be printing them in this case. MetaMorph NX produces some highlighting, syntax highlighting it's called, to help make the coding a little bit easier. So it pulls out keywords or reserved words in bold, light blue color. So things like if, else, else, for and in, while, things like that, are all going to be in this bright blue bold. String values, those are values that are between double or single quotes, are going to have that same light blue color, but they're going to be not bolded. So they're going to be normal font, but in the light blue color. If you have a method will be detected as the open parentheses and the closed parentheses. Those methods are going to be dark blue and bolded, like the mm.print. Then numbers, any value that can be translated into a numeric character, is going to have a dark blue color without bold. There are also comments that you can put into the script. A single line comment will start with a pound sign. A multi-line comment can start with 3 single quotes. And that will allow you to produce a comment over multiple lines. And those are both displayed as green. Inevitably, as we go through and start writing scripts, we're going to come up with error messages. Error messages are going to pop up at the bottom left corner of the screen, and they'll either have a yellow mark if there's an error or a warning that doesn't stop the script from running, or red if it prevents the script from running completely. If you click on the little red square, it'll pop up a message which describes the error message in more detail, the error that occurred. And the key feature here is that the message is going to contain the line number for the error message, or for where the error occurred. So here it says there's an error while running the script on line 2. The script will be numbered, each line will be numbered. So you look at line 2, and you can see that there's a UI.utility that show message box, and that would be the line that contains an error. Below that, you can see that the error message is that the method expects 2 parameters, but I only gave it 1. So you'd have to put in a comma and provide a second message. Okay. Some examples. On this page, we'll display a couple examples that you'll be using, or that you could use for scripting. First one is, let's say you have a data set that has multiple time points and multiple z-steps. You wanted to figure out how many z-steps there are in the data set. You'd look at the property mm.experiment.dataset. That gets you to the data set, and then inside that would be the property number of z-steps. If you wanted to access the channels, that's how many different wavelengths were acquired in that data set. So for instance, if you want to be able to scale it or hide some, you go to UI.channels. This is a collection, so it's something that you could loop through or pull out one particular value from, as if it were a list. You can modify which ribbon is available, or which is visible. So for instance, when you're running scripts, you often go to the script ribbon, but maybe you want to show a measurement ribbon so that the user can see a measurement that's being run, or you want to show the acquisition ribbon. So use UI.ribbon.selectActiveTab by name, and the name that you would give would be the displayed name on the ribbon itself. Another way of setting which time point is visible, UI.imageDisplay.currentTimeStep, and this is that .value. Right? So most of the things in NX are properties. The way that you assign to a property is use the .value. So it's UI.imageDisplay, current timestamp, value equals whatever value you want to give it. A little bit more complex is how to get measurements out of a measurement set. Measurement set, in order to get data out of a measurement set, you basically treat it as if it was a database. So you build a query, you ask for what values you want to retrieve, and then you get a table full of those values, and then you pull out the particular value you want. So you start with the query, equal mm.measurementData.getQueryParameters. First thing you want to do is make sure that it's all empty. So it's going to come out with all the columns in the measurement set, the current measurement set selected. And we only care about one measurement here. So we'll clear all the columns. And then we're going to add some columns in. So query.measurementColumnsWidth, and we're going to set that value to true. That's the one that we care about. Then we're going to actually run the query, which returns a table. The table is equal to mm.measurementData.runQuery, and then the query that we just built. And since we only had one column that we asked for, and if we have multiple data sets or not, we're just going to look for the first one. The width is equal to table.rows So that would be the first row of data, the first column, and that would be our width of our first object. These are some utility scripts that you can use quite often for troubleshooting purposes. One thing you might want to pop up a message to the user. And so this will be a UI.utility.show message box. The first parameter is the message that you want to write in the dialog. The second parameter is the title of the dialog box itself. So it's a great way of just giving feedback to the user. Pausing a script. So if you do mm.script.wait for user interaction, this is going to give control of MetaMorph NX back to the user, allow them to do something. And then there's a resume script button on the script toolbar, which you would click to continue running the Python script. Now, MetaMorph's IntelliSense, NX is going to, the scripting interface is going to allow you to look up the values inside the interface. So you can type in .channel, whatever, and it'll tell you what is available for each section, and I'll go in that when we switch over to NX. But the IntelliSense, that feedback that tells you what's underneath or what's available, only goes so deep. After a certain point, it doesn't know what's in there. Maybe it's from a different library or from the .NET classes, which don't get cached into IntelliSense. To get more details about what's available or what values can be called from a property, you can use the dir method. And it looks up the directory of all the values, or all the properties, really, of something that's passed to it. So dir is going to give me all the available properties to mm.channel. You're going to want to turn that into a string so that you can actually read it. So that's what the str does. Otherwise, it's a list. So it's str, string version of the list of all properties in mm.channel. Then we want to display that, and one nice way of displaying that is just by printing it to the scripting dialog. So if you want to get more information about a particular attribute or property, you can type in mm.print str dir mm.channel. Now, so far, we've really just touched on the subject of Python. And it's a full scripting language. You can do a whole lot with it. And above just basic Python, we're using IronPython, which gives you access to a lot more of the .NET features. Because that's really beyond the scope of what we can do in this presentation, covering all that information. Here are some websites and books that you can use to help learn the programming language. So when the websites, on the docs.python.org and ironpython.net, there's a lot of documentation, there's tutorials, there's lists of the library functions that you can use, and all of those things would be available in MetaMorph NX. If you're starting off from the beginning without much Python experience, there's a book, the Quick Python book. It's an introductory level book, doesn't assume any programming experience, so it's a good way to just jump right in and start learning, what is programming, what is a variable, how do you call methods, things like that. And then IronPython in Action is a little bit more of an intermediate level. It assumes some knowledge of programming, but doesn't really assume any knowledge with Python itself. and it provides more details about how to interact with the .NET libraries, and even goes into some of the user interface structures, so how to build dialogues that you can ask for information. Okay, I'm going to switch over to NX right now, and to show you a couple of the dialogues here. So this is the script interface, the script ribbon. Create a script brings up this dialog at the bottom, whereas run script allows you to select any .py file and execute it. Okay. You can see the scripting, the highlighting of text at the bottom here, the keywords and strings. Message in the darker blue, and this particular one doesn't have any comments, but I could add a comment by using 3 single quotes, typing in a comment, and ending it with 3 single quotes. That's really important when you're writing your script. The script can do a lot, and if you look at it, it's not very, and then once you get into each line, it's descriptive, but overall, you don't really know what's happening unless you go into detail. Putting in comments can make these sections of code a lot easier to read, because you can give an overview in the comment. Here's what this is meant to do, and then do that action. It's really important to write those comments so when you come back later, you understand what's going on without a lot of time with troubleshooting or reading the code that you've already learned how to write a couple months ago or a year ago. At the bottom of the interface here, there's 2 tabs. The bottom one is the output. So if I type in a short command at the top, so print when I execute this code, it's going to print at the bottom. So any of that printed output gets displayed at the bottom. Also in the interface, also down at the bottom is the interface button. This is what lets you look up what's available in the NX scripting interface. So under for instance, you can go, here's the camera, and here's how you could set or get the binning value for the camera or the exposure time. Okay. An example of a collection might be this devices, right? So this interface, devices, will list all the hardware devices that are connected to the microscope, to the software that you can control. So that you could use that to look up a particular device, or to loop through all the devices until you found the one that you wanted to set or get a value from. And then the UI interface, this utility shows a message box, and a show yes/no message box will pop up a question, and then will allow you to choose the yes/no and provides a variable, which is a true/false variable that you can then branch your code on. We talked about IntelliSense. IntelliSense allows you to look up, so given a attribute, so like this UI, I can type in dot, and it's going to give me the choice of what's available on that object. So I can look at the current channel, do a dot and find out what's available on channel. So here's the name, and name has a value because it's a property. Okay, I think that's about it for the overview. I think we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, your microphones are all muted, so if you have any questions, on the control panel on the bottom, can you show them the control panel?
I don't know. I guess it doesn't get hidden.
But your control panel, the WebEx control panel on the bottom, there's an icon that has a question mark on it. That'll expand out the Q&A section box, and you can type in your questions within that, and then we'll address them.
So the icon is a question mark on a blue background.
So someone took asked how much example code is there. We have probably about 10 or 12 different short Python scripts as far as examples go that we can make available. So my ultimate plan is I will send out an email to those that have attended with links to, there's a recording that we're doing currently, as well as the PowerPoint, and we'll throw in some example Python codes in there within MetaMorph as well. So we'll make that available for people.
There's a MetaMatters that was recently released, which has some scripting examples in there as well, and some descriptions of what those scripts do.
It's a good question, Tony, as far as you asked, will you guys offer some IronPython specific classes in sometime next year? That is something that is currently being discussed. It will probably be incorporated within the workshop cycle. So if and when we do, we'll definitely make sure it's advertised so people know that they can participate. Any other questions? Okay. No other questions? Then I do want to thank everyone. Like I said, we'll try to get an email out to folks that will have links to the PowerPoint, to the recorded session if you want to review anything, as well as some sample Python scripts for you to use. Thanks, and have a good day.